In our first episode, we trace the evolution of Freemasonry from the working lodges of medieval stonemasons in England and Scotland. These were highly skilled craftsmen who built Europe's great cathedrals, castles, and civic monuments, and who organized themselves into lodges to protect their wages, regulate their trade, and preserve their independence in a period of intense government control over labor. We explored how wider economic and political changes, from the decline of feudalism after the Black Death to the rise of powerful urban guilds and a new gentry class, reshaped the lodges. In our last episode, we saw how non-working accepted members, including nobles, scholars, and early scientists, began entering lodges alongside craftsmen. By the mid to late 17th century, figures such as Sir Robert Murray and Elias Ashmole show that Freemasonry was no longer just a builder's guild, but an increasingly social and civic institution. While English Masonry remained largely practical and non-symbolic into the late 1600s, the groundwork had been laid for a major transformation. That unresolved question, what drove Freemasonry's leap into a moral, philosophical, and symbolic system, is where today's episode begins. To better understand this, we must examine the religious and political upheavals that reshaped early modern Britain, starting with the Reformation. But first, don't forget to subscribe. The Reformation was a 16th-century religious movement that challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and led to the rise of Protestant Christianity. Sparked by figures like Martin Luther, it criticized church corruption, emphasized salvation through faith rather than rituals, and promoted direct access to Scripture. As the movement spread across Europe, many regions broke from papal authority and created new national churches. Under King Henry VIII, whose desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon led to a confrontation with the Pope, when Rome refused his request, Henry broke from papal authority and, through the Acts of Supremacy 1534, declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Although Henry's initial motivations were political and personal rather than theological, the break opened the door to major religious change. Under Henry and his ministers, especially Thomas Cromwell, the Crown dissolved England's monasteries, seizing their vast lands and wealth. This not only weakened traditional Catholic structures, but also redistributed power and property to the nobility and emerging gentry. After Henry's death, the Reformation accelerated under his son, Edward VI, whose government introduced strong Protestant doctrines and worship practices, including the First Book of Common Prayer. When Mary I succeeded him, she attempted to restore Catholicism and papal authority, leading to the persecution of Protestants and a temporary reversal of reforms. Her death, however, brought Elizabeth I to the throne, and under her long reign the Elizabethan religious settlement established a moderate Protestant Church of England that endured and became a central part of English identity. Protestantism itself was deeply divided. Puritans, who believed the Church had not reformed enough, and sought to remove remaining Catholic-style practices while emphasizing preaching, strict morality, and personal Bible study. Some Protestants adopted Presbyterian ideas, influenced by John Calvin, favoring church governance by elected elders rather than bishops. More radical were the separatists, including early Baptists, and the Pilgrims, who felt the Church of England was beyond reform and formed independent congregations based on voluntary membership. Closely related were the Independents or Congregationalists, who believed each congregation should govern itself without any higher church authority. These religious fractures extended beyond England. The French Huguenots were Protestants in Catholic France, most of whom followed the teachings of John Calvin. Emerging in the 16th century, they quickly became a significant religious minority, particularly among urban craftsmen, merchants, and parts of the nobility. Their growth alarmed the Catholic monarchy and clergy, leading to decades of tension and violence. Persecution intensified during the French Wars of Religion 1560 to 1598, a series of brutal conflicts marked by massacres such as the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, when thousands of Huguenots were killed. Temporary relief came with the Edict of Nantes in 1598, issued by King Henry IV, which granted Huguenots limited religious freedom and civil rights. This protection ended in 1685, when Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes through the Edict of Fontainebleau. Protestant churches were destroyed, pastors were expelled, and Huguenots were forced to convert, flee, or face imprisonment. Although immigration was officially forbidden, an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Huguenots escaped France over the following decades. Many sought refuge in England, which welcomed them as fellow Protestants and skilled workers. Huguenots settled primarily in London, where they would make up 10% of the population, and like all migrant groups, they sought to integrate into society. One of the primary routes of integration was through none other than the established Masonic lodges. As we learned in our last episode, these local trade organizations no longer functioned to just regulate the craft of stonemasonry, but were now a key component of networking, politicking, and provincial social life. It was the mass immigration Huguenots, escaping religious persecution, that helped shape a culture of religious tolerance that would become a staple of the speculative masonry we know today. Meanwhile, England itself had been descending into a political crisis. In 1640, the English Civil War had broken out between King Charles I and Parliament over issues of authority, religion, and governance. Charles believed in the divine right of kings and attempted to rule without Parliament, while many in Parliament feared he was abusing power and leaning toward Catholic-style practices in the Church of England. Tensions erupted into war between the Royalists, who supported the king, and the Parliamentarians, led in part by Oliver Cromwell. After years of fighting, the Parliamentarians were victorious. Charles I was executed in 1649, and England briefly became a republic known as the Commonwealth. The conflict reshaped English politics, weakening the monarchy and strengthening parliamentary power, setting the stage for modern constitutional government. The monarchy and the House of Lords were abolished, and strict Puritan-influenced laws were introduced. However, political divisions, economic strain, and dissatisfaction with military rule created instability. Following Cromwell's death, the government weakened, leading to the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 under Charles II. Although the king returned, the war's legacy permanently limited royal power and strengthened Parliament's role, paving the way for constitutional monarchy in Britain. Out of this turmoil emerged two political traditions. The Tories supported a strong hereditary monarchy, the traditional authority of the Church of England, and a more hierarchical social order. They emphasized loyalty to the king and were wary of religious dissenters, favoring the stability they believed came from maintaining established institutions. The Whigs generally supported limiting the power of the monarchy, defending the authority of Parliament, and promoting Protestant religious tolerance, especially for dissenting Protestants outside the Church of England. They feared absolute monarchy intended to oppose any policies they believed favored Catholic influence. Beyond politics, the emerging Whigs were deeply connected to the scientific and intellectual culture of the Enlightenment. Many leading Whigs were members or patrons of scientific societies, most notably the Royal Society of London, founded in 1660. The Royal Society promoted empirical inquiry, experimentation, and rational debate, values that closely paralleled Whig political ideals. When James II, an openly Catholic king, attempted to expand royal authority, appoint Catholics to high positions, and suspend laws that protected Protestant dominance, he alarmed both Parliament and the public. The birth of James's Catholic son in 1688 intensified fears of a Catholic dynasty. In response, a group of English nobles secretly invited William of Orange, a Protestant and the husband of James's daughter Mary, to intervene and save English liberties. The aftermath reshaped the English government. James fled to France, and Parliament declared that he had abdicated, offering the crown jointly to William and Mary. Parliament also passed the Bill of Rights 1689, which limited the powers of the monarchy, protected parliamentary authority, and guaranteed certain civil liberties. The Glorious Revolution ensured a Protestant succession, curtailed absolute monarchy, and helped establish the foundation of Britain's modern constitutional government. With James II in exile, many of his supporters, later called Jacobites, continued to view him and his heirs as the legitimate rulers. Political and religious tensions deepened with the Act of Settlement of 1701, which legally barred Catholics from the throne and ensured that succession would pass only to Protestant heirs. This act further alienated those who believed hereditary right outweighed parliamentary authority. The situation intensified after the Acts of Union in 1707. Which united England and Scotland into Great Britain. The union was deeply unpopular in parts of Scotland, especially among Highland clans and elites who resented the loss of Scottish political independence and economic disruption. In 1714, when Queen Anne died without an heir, instead of a Stuart successor, the crown passed to George I of Hanover, a German Protestant with little cultural or political connection to Britain. Many perceived his accession as foreign imposition rather than legitimate rule. This discontent was especially strong among Scottish nobles and Tory sympathizers who favored the Stuart claim. Amid this climate of resentment, economic strain, religious division, and dynastic grievance, Jacobite leaders believed conditions were ripe for rebellion. In 1715, They rose in support of James Francis Edward Stuart, the Old Pretender, hoping to overturn the Hanoverian succession and restore the Stuart monarchy. The rebellion was led primarily by John Erskine, Earl of Mar, who raised support in the Scottish Highlands, where loyalty to the Stuarts remained strong. Jacobite forces quickly gained territory in Scotland, while smaller, poorly coordinated uprisings occurred in northern England. However, the movement suffered from weak leadership, internal divisions, and a lack of decisive military action. The largest engagement, the Battle of Sheriffmuir in November 1715, ended inconclusively, but it halted Jacobite momentum. James Stuart arrived in Scotland late and failed to inspire widespread support. Without substantial foreign assistance, especially from France, the rebellion collapsed. By early 1716, government forces had reasserted control, and James fled back into exile. Although unsuccessful, the 1715 rising kept the Jacobite cause alive and set the stage for later uprisings. So what does all of this have to do with Freemasonry? While Masonry had been slowly intertwining itself with the civic order, the religious and political tensions of the day were tearing the rest of society apart. To remedy this, a small group of Hanoverian Whig loyalists hatched a plan to use the established and influential Masonic lodges of the day to once again bring unity and stability to Britain. By uniting all Masonic lodges under the control of a single Grand Lodge and a new philosophy now known as Speculative Freemasonry. By the 18th century, Masonic lodges increasingly reflected the political divisions of the wider society. Franco-Scottish lodges, especially those connected to Scottish, Irish, and continental networks, often lean toward Tory and Jacobite sympathies. Many Scots and Irish Catholics, along with French supporters of the Stuarts, viewed Freemasonry as a discrete social space where exiles, military officers, and aristocrats could maintain shared identity and loyalty. In France, where Jacobite exiles clustered after failed uprisings, lodges frequently included former officers and courtiers of the Stuart cause. These lodges tended to emphasize chivalric themes, aristocratic lineage, and loyalty to hereditary monarchy, elements that later influenced the development of high-degree systems, such as the Scottish Rite. In England, especially in London, Masonic lodges became dominated by Hanoverian-aligned Whigs. These lodges attracted merchants, professionals, scientists, civil servants, and members of Enlightenment institutions such as the Royal Society. Their political outlook emphasized constitutional monarchy, religious toleration for Protestants, commercial expansion, and loyalty to the Hanoverian state. Thus, the creation of the Grand Lodge of London in 1717 can be understood as an attempt to reconcile these competing traditions into a single, stabilizing Masonic ideology. By uniting lodges under a single administrative body, English Freemasonry retained ritual, hierarchy, symbolism, and a language of moral honor, elements that appealed to aristocratic and chivalric sensibilities. The emphasis on ancient lineage, initiation, secrecy, and brotherhood preserved the sense of continuity and dignity valued by Tory and Stuart sympathizers, while stripping these elements of explicit dynastic loyalty. At the same time, the Grand Lodge incorporated Whig and Enlightenment principles by reframing Masonry as a moral and philosophical society rather than a political network. Lodge governance was standardized around elected officers, written constitutions, regular minutes, and majority rule, mirroring parliamentary practice. The fraternity's public identity emphasized obedience to lawful government, religious tolerance among Protestants, and personal improvement through reason, values aligned with Hanoverian Whig ideology. The Grand Lodge system would also seek to reconcile religious differences as well. The Protestant Reformation had challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and advanced the principle of sola scriptura, the belief that Scripture alone is the ultimate authority for Christian faith. Yet this very emphasis on individual interpretation led to a wide range of denominations and deep divisions within Christianity, which in turn led to division within Britain. Early speculative Freemasonry would emerge as a space where men from these divided traditions could meet in peace, requiring belief in God and respect for Scripture but avoiding doctrinal debates that fueled sectarian conflict. By promoting moral teachings, symbolic instruction, and personal conscience rather than creeds, Freemasonry created a framework that honored the Reformation's commitment to sola scriptura while offering a practical way to foster unity among Christians who interpreted that Scripture differently. This reconciliation was formalized in Anderson's Constitutions of 1723, which carefully balanced both traditions. The text affirmed loyalty to civil authority, satisfying Whig concerns, while grounding Freemasonry in an ancient, universal moral tradition that transcended contemporary politics, appealing to those drawn to older notions of honor and legitimacy. Crucially, the constitutions prohibited political and sectarian disputes within lodges, allowing men of opposing sympathies to meet on the level without threatening state stability. In this way, the Grand Lodge did not eliminate ideological difference. It contained and neutralized it. Freemasonry became a space where hierarchy coexisted with equality, tradition with reform, and spirituality with rational morality. By reconciling aristocratic ritual culture with Enlightenment civic values, the Grand Lodge created a unifying Masonic identity that could accommodate former Jacobites and committed Whigs alike, transforming Freemasonry from a politically ambiguous network into a broadly acceptable, transnational moral fraternity. In our next video, we will explore the key players in this innovation and how they shaped what we now know as speculative Freemasonry. So don't forget to hit subscribe.